Hello, I'm Chris Hartwell, and welcome to The Heartbeat, the place where I talk about just a few of the things that make this little guy tick. Today, I'm going to be talking about episode 7 of season 2 of HBO's The Leftovers. Join me, won't you? Alright guys, per usual, I will be talking about some of the positives from this week's episode, some of the negatives, and then kind of wrapping up with what I'm looking forward to next week on The Leftovers. Though, that we're trying to emulate this season of The Leftovers, and this last week's episode especially, I probably should have just X-nayed that little intro I did right there and jumped straight into things. Just looking at the previously on The Leftovers alone, it was very clear that they're going to be covering a lot of ground and a lot was going to be coming to a head this week. But let me take pause just a moment longer and say it's that very intentional, clearly inspired, very specifically designed structure and pace that at the very least makes me think twice when considering, do I actually want a third season of The Leftovers? Because Lindelof himself has said a few times, we're going to take things one season at a time, allowing the collaborative nature of our show to inspire us. And I really feel like that freedom has been one of the reasons why this season has been so great. You can really feel Lindelof and Perrotta leaving it all in the court every single episode, because they're not saving anything for next season. This might be their last season, and therefore it has to be their best. And what I don't want, and what a little part of me is afraid of, is they will return for a third season, but without that same drive, and without that same intention, and without those same ideas and themes that are new and fresh, and so exciting and compelling to them that they have to tell them. Returning though to this week's episode, it really felt like Perrotta and Lindelof were kind of setting the bar even higher for themselves as far as what they were trying to accomplish. To put this episode in context, episode 1, the writers set out to set the stage for the Murphys. Episode 2, they set out to justify why the Garveys would go to Miracle, Texas, and Nora along with them. Episode 3, they set out to justify why Laurie and Tom, both of whom were horribly burned by cults back in season 1, would use cult-like tactics to give others something to hold on to. Which, as I predicted, it does seem like they have very different conflicting reasons for doing that. On episode 4, the writers set out to justify Kevin actually acknowledging Patty's presence in his life, as well as Nora really owning up to Kevin's and hers. In episode 5, they set out to justify Matt Jamison's reason for fighting to stay in Miracle, Texas. In episode 6, they set out to justify why Erica Murphy chose to open herself up to certain people, as well as completely close herself off to others. And now in episode 7, they've set out to justify why Kevin would choose to kill himself. And if that is not an impossibly tall order, I don't know what is. Though it actually is not completely introverse territory for Lindelof as a writer. Actually, back on Lost Season 5, Jack had a pretty similar trajectory, although in that instance he chose a nuke instead of poison to kill himself. And I just have to say right now, I love how Kevin's hunt for Patty in the forest is pretty much identical to Jack's hunt for his father back on the island, right down to the shot composition. What's phenomenal here, though, is unlike Lost, where Lindelof had 5 seasons to grow and evolve the character of Jack Shephard, really pushing to that point of being willing to nuke an island and kill himself in the process, he really only has half of a season to bring our character of Kevin Garvey to the point where he is at the end of this episode. And actually, with all the other character-centric episodes, Kevin really only had 3 episodes to believably get to this really extreme place. As such, you can practically hear the rubber squealing as it hits the road in this week's A Most Powerful Adversary, which is a legit title, by the way. But straight from the outset, you just feel that need within Kevin to do something as he wakes up handcuffed to a bed and Nora's gone, and then Jill walks in, and straight away we start to see that fissure that was so present in season 1 begin to open again. Another side note in comparison to Lost, the handcuff that remains around Kevin's arm this entire episode is very reminiscent of the handcuff that remains around Jin's arm in Lost for most of season 1 and season 2. And that need to act and just do something grows each and every scene as Kevin continues to be haunted by and plagued by Patty. And we really do get a genuine sense of what it must feel like to be going insane with all these different voices in your head competing with the world around you. And I thought the Locksmith scene especially did a brilliant job of showing us what it must feel like to lose one's grip on reality and our control of how we interact with those around us. And so when Michael showed up with a potential solution to Kevin's problems, I actually believed that Kevin would go with this kid that he hardly knew. It was actually the next scene, though, that I felt like had the greatest potential of losing the audience, and therefore I thought was one of the greatest successes of the episode because it didn't lose me. After all, when Virgil says, "Let me free you," and Kevin responds, "You want to kill me?" And Virgil says, "Temporarily." That is so very genre. But what made it believable, and what allowed me to continue to suspend my disbelief, was Kevin's response. He didn't just accept it, he actually did the opposite. He got out of there, he said, "This is ridiculous, this is ludicrous, get away from me." But the other brilliant thing about that scene is it did plant the seeds of that idea. So by the time we got to the end of the episode, we were aided in our acceptance of it because it had been set up earlier on. And from there, it was just about compounding hardship on top of hardship, doubt on top of doubt, really eliminating every single other option that Kevin could take to resolve the situation. Because again, this episode is all about getting a man to the end of his rope so that we, along with him, could really understand why he would choose to kill himself. So, for instance, the scene between Kevin and John, a moment that had real tension and stakes because Kevin actually knew what John was capable of, was really about him exhausting that option for friendship. And then after that is the really heartbreaking scene between Jill and Kevin, where she kind of just comes out and says to her dad, please figure this out, this is twice now. Which is really just stoking that fire of that already present parental insecurity that Kevin had within himself. And then on top of that, Laurie comes in a few scenes later and kind of explains to Kevin how Tommy has been corresponding to Jill, and how he's actually been staying with her, which makes him feel all the more isolated. And then the final zinger is the moment where Laurie says to Kevin, there is no Patty, there is only you. Which essentially is confirming Kevin's greatest fear, that being he's completely alone, and he has lost his family once again. Even so, when Kevin returns to Virgil at the end of the episode, we don't find a man who's completely devoid of doubt, who's completely convinced of the safety and logic of what he's about to do. He himself isn't convinced of the genre element of the episode, allowing us to continue to harbor some doubts in ourselves. There's even doubt present in the weakness of one of Virgil's final attempts to comfort Kevin when he says, you know that guy on the pillar? And you can just see the thought on Kevin's face, which is, yeah, I know the guy on the pillar. He seems absolutely nuts. Also, I love how the mason jar didn't shatter when it hit the ground. Yes, it's a small thing, but I think it really does demonstrate in a grand way why this show works so well, because it does dance around so many different ideas that many people would consider to be genre, which oftentimes can be the death of a show. Just look at the 5th season of Lost when they start to time travel. Which I personally love, by the way. And one of the reasons I loved it so much, and one of the reasons I love this show so much, is just the masterful way that Lindelof navigates around those rather fantastic ideas. And when he does dare to dip his toe into them, he does so in this extremely realistic, very balanced way. So in Lost Season 5, for example, as they're traipsing around the jungle, being catapulted from one time to the next, every single one of them trying to figure out what the heck is going on, all Sawyer knows and cares about is the fact that he's not wearing a shirt or shoes and really wants some. So in not too dissimilar of a way, it's great to have Laurie step into Kevin's life and really provide that balance by completely disregarding any notion that he might be receiving some sort of supernatural visitation from Patty. Another thing, and it is kind of subtle and somewhat goes unnoticed, which I think is actually the greatest compliment for it, is really the fact that the show's producers have chosen to shoot on real locations. As Tom Spazzali accurately described, there's an authenticity that comes with actually filming in homes. Right along with that, I love the very whimsical, fanciful, though still realistically handled design for Virgil's place. In addition to that great production design, I really have to compliment the direction on this episode. Mimi Leader is back, and man is it apparent every single time she is. She has such a great eye for framing and such a beautiful way of directing and guiding performances. I especially noticed that in the conversation between Kevin and Laurie. What a perfect way to frame that conversation, with that fence right between them. And what a beautiful way to guide those performances in this beautiful power play, where Laurie starts out on the ropes, but then ultimately it's Kevin that ends up looking like the weak fool. And it's really cool to hear from this woman who actually pioneered the usage of Steadicam on television shows all the way back in the 90s on ER, when she talks about how intentional and how cinematic her decisions are on this show. There's been a visual evolution on season 2, with an incorporation of big crane and drone shots to show the bigness and specialness of Jarden. Another compliment to the writing on this specific episode is just how believably and naturally it made the main characters' lives so difficult. And another show that really did this well, I thought, was Breaking Bad. In the same way that good things happening to a character can feel forced or contrived, so can bad things. And I think both shows, by and large, have really avoided that. So for example, in this episode, Laurie being reintroduced into Kevin's life could have felt forced, it could have felt contrived, but because of all the hints and all the little steps they'd taken prior to this moment, it really did feel natural. And for the same reasons, Jill arriving home moments after Laurie had gotten there didn't feel contrived, it felt needed. Or the fact that moments before, Nora had finally called Kevin back. Speaking of Nora, I have to admit that I didn't fully initially believe that she would actually leave Kevin, but the more that I thought about it, the more it made sense, because though she could handcuff his body to the bed, she couldn't handcuff his mind. And that lack of control is terrifying to her, and she really doesn't know what to do with that, and that's why she had to give herself space and distance from it. Another really interesting, amazing element of this episode was a few of the revelations regarding Patty. Just hearing her say to Kevin things like, a solution to all of our problems, really put the both of them in the same boat together. Or when she said, I am so desperate to do battle. Things are not resolved for this person, and she wants something. Though, going right hand in hand with that, one of the negatives from this week's episode, one of the things that I didn't fully believe, at least as it stands right now, was just Patty's confession to Kevin that she's just as lost as him. It felt a little bit like a cop-out, and unless it's further explained, I didn't fully buy into it. Also, another one of the elements that didn't fully add up for me, didn't fully work for me, was just the big conversation between Laurie and Kevin. Yes, the acting was brilliant. Yes, the direction was amazing. But I was just a little bit bummed that the writing of the scene was primarily about catching these two characters up with one another, instead of really fully developing their relationship. Though I absolutely love the little touch of Kevin apologizing to Laurie about the dog that they never got. As far as things I'm looking forward to next week, I'm really just excited to see how they continue to handle these very genre elements. Will they lose their audience, or will they be able to continue to maintain and walk this beautiful tightrope? What will become of Kevin's handprint? How will John respond to the death of his father? What sort of hand did Michael actually have in Kevin's death? After all, it was Michael that brought Kevin to Virgil to begin with, when he first jumped into his truck. And more than anything, obviously, what will happen to Kevin? Is it possible that we'll see him make contact with Evie on the other side? Will he come back to life at all? And so I will join you all in crying. Can it please be next Sunday night already? But for now, those are my thoughts on this week's episode. I would still love to know what you guys think. What'd you love? What'd you hate? What were the standout moments? Any grand theories or predictions for next week or for this whole season of The Leftovers? Also, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you all to stay up to date on all of those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.